Hi, my name is Al Manazar. Thanks for tuning in for another episode of APTV. Today I got Michael Diston from Baker McKenzie. Michael's been with Baker McKenzie for 15 years, which means he finished law school at 10 or 11. Michael represents a lot of luxury retailers who have retail stores here in Australia. Also does work for some major landlords and private landlords. Michael and I have had a number of negotiations where we both won, kind of. But Michael's a personal friend of mine, and will talk to us about what major landlords and major retailers are doing and planning for the future with their retail leases and their properties. Michael, thank you very much for coming on. I do appreciate it. So Baker McKenzie is the biggest law firm in the world. You have offices everywhere, and you're active in all markets. Are you in open dialogue with the offices around Asia Pacific?
Yeah, I mean, without putting my advertising hat on too much, when you work at a place like Baker's, you're in constant contact with the APAC region, especially some of the work that I do with like a large luxury retail group. I do their leasing in Australia, but not only Australia, in Hong Kong, Singapore, Thailand, you name it. So yeah, I'm in constant contact with those offices.
How is Australia, more specifically Melbourne, perceived by your counter offices around the world?
I actually don't think much has changed. You know, we're in the period we're in now compared to 2019, 2018. I actually don't think a huge amount has changed in terms of perception. I think people still view us as open for business. We're a good market to build your business, to expand. Yeah, I don't think the perception has changed much. I think they still view us as a place where we're open for business and a good place to expand. I think if there are any concerns about the current market, then they can look at other sectors of the property industry that you can see booming right now. Residential, we've got a lot of new instructions for industrial property, and that seems to be really strong right now. So if there's any sort of if they don't have confidence in the retail property market, I think they can look to that and say, why can't the retail leasing market bounce back as well?
Are you seeing a lot of your global customers look to invest or do business in Melbourne?
Yeah, I mean, throughout 2020, we saw those deals that were still, struck late 2019. They were still going full steam ahead 2020. There might have been a bit of a drop off in new deals. In 2021, we've seen that sort of come right back up, and I'm sure you've probably seen similar, that you're doing a lot more leasing deals, and those are happening pretty regularly. Just the other day, we had a large, really well-known global client who's chosen to have their distribution centre in Melbourne, and they've picked that space over a number of other locations in Asia Pacific and even Sydney. They're saying Sydney, it's about a 40% premium over choosing Sydney from Melbourne, just with rent, transport, labour costs, all that kind of stuff. So I think it's definitely still on like the radar for business in Australia, and more particularly Melbourne.
Yeah. So Baker McKenzie and you specifically have a number of large global luxury retail customers that you represent. I mean, you and I have had a lot of fun negotiating and arguing on a couple of leasing deals, which we've got there at the end.
And calls at 7 a.m. in the morning to say, where are the documents?
Yes, sometimes that does happen. But, it's retail. What are you going to do? Can't ignore it. Some of the big global retailers you represent, what are they doing now, and how are they planning for the next 5 years in the context to Australia?
There's no real sort of persistent theme or general theme that they're sort of looking for in the future, but it's really picking back up where they left off. You can see at the start of the first half of 2021, you got glimpses of people really happy to get back out and get back to the shops. And I think they're taking that confidence, and they know that now society kind of has the tools to deal with this really bad period we've been in. And it's really picking back where they left off and sort of making up for lost time. In terms of 5 years, I mean, it's a little bit hard to gauge from a legal perspective, because you sort of get the deals coming through as they come through. So, but I wouldn't have any sort of hesitation in saying that that our large global clients are going to pick back up where they left off and keep expanding.
So are we now finished this COVID shutdown period? Is it over now?
I think it is. I mean,
are your customers talking like it's over?
I think they are. I mean, there was that talk earlier in 2021 where we were saying, okay, we're over the hump now.
So Australia is very much on your luxury customers' radar. Australia is still a place to be, both airport shopping centers, high street CBDs.
Everywhere.
And they're just picking up where they left off in early 2020.
Yep.
That's good.
Yeah.
Great, we get to keep our jobs.
Well, I'm happy about it.
Yeah. Let's pretend for a second you gave free advice. What would your free advice be to a retailer during this whole in and out and COVID period and shutdown being over and now opening up into 2022?
I think it's sort of merged a little bit. I'm sort of Bakers is in the middle of a period where it was really tough on both parties, landlords and tenants.
You represent both in some instances.
Correct.
You have clients that are landlords and you have clients that are tenants.
That's
okay.
Right. Yeah. And it was really sort of about coming together and collaborating because they're both hurting. You want to keep the shop occupied, obviously. So the landlord doesn't want an empty shop sitting there, and they might have to take a hit on rent to do that. And I think parties generally did that pretty well. Part of that was the National Code of Conduct that came in each state and territory that sort of helped alleviate some of those issues. But I think generally it was just down to the parties that they came together and used some novel ideas and just being reasonable to each other. And especially now that period's over, you don't want to be that landlord that's holding on to the shop and those high rents and saying, well, take it or leave it, because they're going to leave it. There's a lot of rents are down. There's a lot of spaces that perhaps tenants that wouldn't usually be able to afford can now maybe afford. So, and especially in terms of your lease renewals and that kind of thing, not exercising those options and just accepting the terms that have been pre-agreed, actually going and having a new conversation with your landlord, because you probably get a better deal rather than just exercising your right of renewal.
So what would your advice be to landlords?
Probably just come to the table with a reasonable commercial attitude. Consider, tenants have got to have some more flexibility now. They're still unsure. They've got confidence, but they still have a aspect of sort of cautiousness about the whole thing. So I think, being willing to understand shorter lease terms, a 3+2+2 or something to give tenant flexibility. Some of the concepts that might have been prevalent with the state-based legislation, the deferred rent, things like that, where it still alleviates a bit of stress from the tenant, but the landlord is guaranteed to get paid at least. Being reasonable with your rents, all that kind of stuff.
For any young gun lawyers coming out of law school and entering into the law industry, what would your advice be to them?
I don't think I've got anything particularly groundbreaking, but I think like coming out of law school, I found was a bit like coming out of high school. Like you don't know what you want to do. If you want to go to uni or study a degree, when you come out of law school, you've done all this bits and pieces on different types of law, and you're kind of like, well, which field do I want to practice in? You don't really have a sense of that yet. And I know for me, when I started at Bakers, I started as a paralegal in the disputes team for 5 or 6 years, and everyone thought it was guaranteed I was going to settle there. Obviously, through the grad program, I did rotation through commercial real estate. Wasn't amazing at property at uni, but had a fleeting interest in it, and something stuck, and I really connected with the field, and I just liked the commerciality of it, and wasn't as much sort of black letter type law that a lot of people like me find boring. But that's the thing, like you never know. So when you're in a grad or a clerk position, you're straight out of uni, that's the best time you've got the opportunity to go and try different fields of law when you get your clerkship or, doing your grad rotations. So, obviously you're going to connect with fields of law that you're naturally gravitated towards. But I think you should throw a couple of, fields of law that you're not really familiar with in there as well, because you'd be surprised that you might actually connect with something.
And I guess one of the biggest perks of being in commercial law is you get to work with real estate agents.
Oh, I love them all of them.
Who's your favorite?
Should I say?
Sitting right here.
Okay,
for a retailer entering into a lease, what are the top 3 things that you would tell them to look out for? The top 3 mistakes you commonly see that are avoidable?
We find that redecoration and make good and those kind of things are always really contentious issues. At the end of a lease, they're always something that the parties will fight about. So just really ensuring that, if you've got a new fit out and you've spent a bomb on it and landlords have done some works and you've got a 5-year lease and they want you to redecorate. Well, that's not really commensurate with like the kind of store that you're going with. So there's opportunity to sort of, nut that out at the start and try and save money and time and cost there. Look, coming from a lawyer, this is a real lawyer perspective one, because we all like our ducks in a row. We like lease negotiations to go really easy, but getting the heads of agreement or letter of offer in a really good shape is just, it's so key. Like getting those specific things that your business needs, brand mix if you need to be in the center surrounded by certain brands, intellectual property type stuff if you have, brand identity items that you need to remove on make good that you might not have otherwise been permitted to remove. You've got to really bring those up at lease stage or lease offer stage, because there's nothing worse from my perspective when a tenant comes to me with a signed letter of offer and a lease, says we review it, it's all great, and then they come back and say, oh, by the way, I want brand mix and I want this and we have to have this certain thing. And you just turn around and say, look, we can do it. It's going to cost you more in time and money to negotiate. But if they just brought it up at that stage, it would be so much easier.
But once a lease is signed, does the heads of agreement that was signed previously actually have any bearing?
Not really. And that's the importance of ensuring that all the terms in the heads are in the lease, because once that falls, you might be able to make a claim later that, it was misrepresentation or something. But that once the lease is signed, really the heads of agreement just
falls away. Yeah. Any other advice?
Look, probably one other comment to make. It's not a tip or a trick as such, but we're seeing, a lot of my clients are coming to me with existing leases or new leases, and they're really focused on omni-channel type activities where, they're trying to bring the online to the bricks and mortar together, whether that's click and collect or, you go into a store, interactive store experiences and that kind of thing. But they're really looking at it from a gross sales and turnover rent perspective. Yeah. And so we're doing a lot of work in reviewing those definitions of gross sales in that context, because a lot of them are so broadly drafted and they actually often overreach, and there might be something that's sort of really focused online and not on the actual particular store. It doesn't relate to their store, so they're paying over and above percentage rent that they otherwise shouldn't really be paying. So we're getting a lot of instructions to review leases from that context as well.
That's been a major point of contention for a very long time, and it seems like there's no kind of agreed or standard anymore. Do you think we'll ever come to a point where this is a standard, the norm?
I don't think so, and I think it'll probably just keep evolving, because there's already from when we were looking at it a couple of years ago, there's already new ways to deliver things, and we ship here and you can pick up there, or we can do this.
Or stores ship products off the shelf to an online customer.
Yeah.
So where does that sale fall into?
Yeah. So that's why I think that's why they're drafted so broadly at the moment, just as a catch-all, where you really should be, as a tenant, you should be looking at that more closely and trying to narrow that down if possible. We won't be seeing like a lot of sort of huge, those wordy, extensive force majeure or pandemic clauses as a standard in leases going forward.
You don't think that's going to change?
I don't think so. Through my work in Southeast Asia, you see those clauses, not in every lease, but you see them semi-regularly. But there's sort of those catch-all, every eventuality kind of clause where, no one reads it until an event's actually happened and they go, oh, okay, we've actually got to have a look at this. I think we can pick parts out of those clauses and not make them as, convoluted as they are. And I think moving forward, things like not requiring tenants to trade if foot traffic in the centre falls below a certain amount, or some of those other concepts we discussed, like deferred rent, that might become a sort of a bit of a mainstay because it's an out for both parties, but no one really loses in the sense that it's not a rent abatement. But I actually don't think that those huge force majeure clauses will become standard.
All these conversations are being played out as we speak, and it's fascinating to see it play out because we're once in like a century type of situation here, and a lot of lessons were learned, but will this ever happen again where we have to learn the lesson? So I'm seeing some owners and some tenants really putting their foot down saying, no, we're not doing it with or without it. But yeah, like everything else, I think if the owner wants to, the tenant wants to be in the property, I think we'll find a middle ground in between. But it is playing out, and from what I'm reading on a global scale, definitely here in Australia.
Yep.
But it's great to hear someone who represents luxury retailers that you see it's not as big of a deal as it sounds.
Look, those type of clients have certainly requested us to start putting it in going forward, but the success they're having with getting it in has been very minimal. And as you said, it's usually here's our client's clause, which is the full gamut of everything. The landlord's not really willing to offer anything. And again, as with everything, you kind of get there in the middle, but it's not,
It's not where you started. Yeah. Great. Cool.